with that, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Cliff Bryant. And Cliff works with Adult Protective Services and is going to talk a little bit about their program and ways that we can work with them.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cliff Bryant. I work for Central Office out of the Adult Protection Branch. We do the consultative piece of things as well as doing any kind of training opportunities as well. So I have made up this little slideshow. Let's see if I can get this going. To discuss just some basic stuff. I don't want to go into too much detail because I'm sure most of you all are aware of some of the information that we've got. So we'll just go over things pretty quickly. What is APS? So APS is doing basically 3 different things. We investigate all of our known or suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation allegations. That's the biggest role. That's where we get involved most frequently, is through the investigative process. We also offer protective services to all adults in an intent to ensure their safety and well-being. And this can be through the investigative process, or it can be through what's called our general adult services referral track, which we'll go over a little bit more here in a minute. And the other piece is just protecting the adult's right to self-determination. That's a big piece. That's the part that tends to get overlooked on a lot of the referrals that we get, but we try to make sure we're keeping that right in place. With the definition of adult, this is the only definition that we use. It gets a little confusing because we just think of an adult as someone who's 18 or older. But for the state of Kentucky, KRS 209 specifically defines an adult. And so that's what we use when we're talking about adult protective services. So there are several parts to this definition. First, they have to be 18 years of age or older. Second, we have to have some kind of mental or physical dysfunction. And that mental or physical dysfunction has to be impeding their ability to meet their activities of daily living, their ability to manage their own resources, or to protect themselves from abuse or neglect or exploitation. The last piece of it is just that they may be in need of protective services, but I'm pretty sure that that little piece of the definition everyone would qualify for. So we just kind of use that one's out there. It's listed. So then we've got the 3 types of investigations that we're going to do. The abuse definition, we need to make sure that it is being inflicted. So that piece of it, we do get a lot of referrals of bruises of unknown origin. Alone, we're not going to take that, but there are some special circumstances around that we would. For instance, if they're in a critical area, or there's just no logical explanation why that bruise could have happened. Obviously, as you get older, you tend to bruise a little more easily, and most of us have no idea where these bruises come from. We wake up the next morning and we're like, oh, how did I get that bruise? And it takes us a little while to figure out what happened. So we just want to make sure that when someone's calling in these allegations that they're saying so-and-so hit them or so-and-so did something. There is these are distinct pieces of definition. So it's the infliction of injury. Then we've got sexual abuse, unreasonable confinement, intimidation, and then the punishment has to result in some kind of physical pain or injury, which includes the mental injury piece of that. So with neglect, this is the deprivation of services is the generic way to look at that. With neglect, we're going to look at medical neglect, we're going to look at hygiene neglect, supervision issues. So when you call in that, again, you're going to give as much information, but we're going to need to see where the allegations have led to some decline or some kind of deprivation of services that has caused a decline. This includes both self-neglect and caretaker neglect in that piece. Exploitation is just the obtaining someone's resources, funds, assets, bank account information, things like that, and with the intent to deprive them of those resources. This is the only law or only definition that we have that has any kind of intent behind it. So when you're exploiting someone, you're intending to do so. Whereas neglect and abuse, you don't have to intend to do that. It could just be something that happens, and we can still say that you're abusing or neglecting. But with exploitation, we have to know that there was some intent behind that. Protective services, the main piece of protective services is obviously the investigative piece of it, but that also includes social services to help prevent abuse, neglect, and exploitation in the future, any kind of legal remedies that may be of use, like emergency protective orders, guardianship services, ex parte, emergency protective services orders, any kind of legal remedy that can come up, and also help obtaining suitable care inside of the home. How to make a report, pretty easy, just call that number. That is a hotline depending on who you get across the state, because it is a statewide system now. Some of them may answer it as child abuse line. It is not just the child abuse line. It handles both child and adult. So they will take all the information. Those are social workers who are, during the day, they're state social workers that are answering that phone. During the evening time, they will still be state social workers Monday through Friday, but on the weekends and 12 to 8 a.m., it is a contract agency. I believe that it's 7 counties right now that handles that. So you may end up with someone who is not a state employee and doesn't know all the ins and outs. So that's why when you're asking questions, they're not going to be able to tell you much during those hours. You can also make a report by the online portal. Just be advised that this online portal is only managed 8 to 4:30 Monday through Friday. It is not for emergencies, because that information may take a little bit to get to someone to screen. It is super helpful for if you are busy and you just don't have time to try to talk to someone. I will say one positive piece of the COVID is that our wait times during the business hours are pretty low, because the phone system has worked pretty well with routing you to different areas. It used to be if you lived in Lexington, you only talked to Lexington workers, whereas now you could be talking to somebody out in Western Kentucky that's taking the information. So, what is the secret to getting a report accepted? There is no secret. Each referral is unique, and you just have to give as much information as possible. I will tell you again, some of these policies that we have in place, there's room for interpretation. And so one person's interpretation may be different than another. So you may call in the exact same report twice, and one person may think that it meets and the other person may think that it doesn't meet. If you ever have something that does not meet our screening criteria, you can always ask to talk to them about it and try them to explain to you why it's not being accepted. So maybe that way you can give a little bit more information to make sure that it is accepted. We can't tell what is going to make it accepted, because again, it's not. There's no special way to do it. But there are some important points when making a report to make sure that you're sharing with them to make sure that it is accepted. If you know the adult's name or identify them. This goes along with the location as well. If you know the location or a way to locate them. For instance, if you're in a nursing home, you're walking by a room and you look into that, see that a staff member hauls off and punches somebody in the face. So you may not know who that resident is, but you know that that resident was laying in the bed next to the window, and that room is directly next to the nursing station on South Hall. So when you call in a report, you may not be able to give the specific name, but you can give enough to identify this individual that I can go out and investigate that case, because I know to go to the window bed next to the nurse's station. So as long as you can provide that kind of description, then it should work. They should be able to take that. And make sure that you're describing the mental or physical dysfunction and how it impacts their ability to carry out their activities of daily living. Just because someone has some kind of mental dysfunction, for instance, schizophrenia does not mean that it's currently impacting their ability to meet their needs. As I talk about, there are situations where, like the movie A Beautiful Mind, there are parts of that movie where he is not able to meet his needs and he needs assistance from others because of his mental health diagnosis. But then there are other parts where he is perfectly functioning and we would not be involved in his life. So you just have to make sure how that mental dysfunction or physical dysfunction is impacting them. Be specific with your allegations, provide as much information as possible, so that way we can fully understand what's going on. For instance, like if someone is missing a medication, don't just say that they didn't get 2 of their medications yesterday. Be specific and provide the names of the medications if you know that information, because there are certain medications that are going to be more detrimental to someone's health than other medications are. If I missed my vitamins yesterday, probably not going to impact me very much. Whereas if I miss my blood pressure medication or my seizure medication, that would be pretty important and could lead to me having to go to the hospital to get treatment. So just be as specific as possible. Leave your contact information, so that way if for some reason there is additional information needed to screen that, we can give you a call back. We can reach out to you to gather that information. Also, if you leave your contact information, you have every right to call back up to find out if that referral was accepted or not. Understand that if the referral was not accepted, there may be reasons behind it. If they tell you that information, great. It'll help you to call in another referral later on. Or it could be something as simple as, we did not meet this one because someone already beat you to the punch. So we does not meet your report because we already accepted the exact same allegations yesterday. We're trying to get our CI staff to understand that if a professional is calling in and that is the case, making sure that they tell them that. So then that way they don't call our central office and say, hey, I know this report it should have met. Why didn't they take this? Because it did meet, it just met 24 hours before you called it in. So that way it saves some time and some complaints. The information, once you have made the report, we're going to take the CI staff are going to decide if it meets or not. So that way, if it does meet for an investigation, they're going to send it up to APS. APS is going to initiate that report within 1 to 48 hours. If it's an emergency, it's supposed to be within 1 hour. If it's not, they have up to 48 hours to do so. Understand that there are circumstances out of our control that would possibly lead to initiating after that time frame. Especially if they're at a home by themselves, they may just not answer the phone, or they may have gotten admitted to a hospital and we just weren't aware of that. So if you have a way to get a hold of them more easily, then just let them know that as well. If you leave your information and say that you're willing to assist with getting contact made because you know it is difficult, leave that information as well so the worker will be aware of that. We're also going to send our notifications to authorized agencies. Those authorized agencies are the Attorney General's office, the Inspector General's office, long-term care ombudsman, police, county attorney, Commonwealth attorney. This may allow for any kind of coordination with investigations. I will tell you that every agency has their own timeframes. APS typically has a more quick turnaround to their investigations than other individuals, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to try to reach out and coordinate those investigations. We also have what's called a general adult services track. This is not an investigation. This is something that is requested by an adult just for assistance. There are 4 different ones, but 2 of them really don't apply to most people. They're very specific, like for court orders and things like that. But these 2 apply directly to anyone out there. So since the adult definition doesn't just give elderly individuals a right to get an investigation, this general adult services allows for it. So it's anyone that's 65 years of age or older. They do not match the definition of adult that we discussed, but they're being abused, neglected, or exploited by a family member, a household member, or a caretaker. Again, this has to be called in at their request. So if they can't make the phone call, they're telling someone else to call it in. But it has to be their wishes that they want APS involved. The second piece of it is if there isn't that meets that definition of adult who is not currently being abused, neglected, or exploited, services to help out with some kind of situation going on. Usually these cases are, I need help getting into a nursing home or some other setting, or I just need help moving somewhere else. So these are like your true social work pieces to our work. The Caregiver Misconduct Registry, this is a perpetrator accountability piece. So with this is going to be any employee of an adult service provider may be placed on a register for 7 years or a lifetime for validated substantiated findings. 7 years is for any investigation that we have a validated substantiated finding for. Lifetime is for any investigation that involves the death of an individual. And those are going to be few and far between, but this process allows for a hearing. Hearings, we at APS only have to have a preponderance of the evidence, so that's just more likely than not. However, there are a lot of hearing officers who happen to be attorneys that believe that we should be reaching a little bit higher with our substantiations and making sure that we are getting closer to that beyond reasonable doubt. That's not how the law is written, but we are going to try our best to get as much evidence as possible. So they are allowed to have that hearing. If you're interested in checking, you can look up yourself. All you have to do is enter your social security number. Be advised that when you go onto that website, you are saying that you're checking for yourself, or if you are an agency, you are checking for work purposes only. It is not for you to just enter your friends and family members' social security numbers. I will say that if you are hiring somebody to work at home, what we always suggest doing, since you're probably not going to get that worker to give you their social security number, what you can do is just say, okay, I need you to check your information and stand over them while they're doing it. So that way you can guarantee that what they are telling you is accurate. What's the biggest complaint that we receive for APS investigations workers? That APS didn't do anything. This is a lot of times is just because of self-determination. When we go out and talk with an individual, we may agree with everything that you have said and your assessment that you made, that this is a deplorable situation, that nobody should be living in this situation. But if that individual still maintains their decisional capacity, we cannot remove them. All of the court orders that we can use require us to testify under oath that they no longer have decisional capacity. So if someone still maintains that decisional capacity, we're going to have to just try to work our hardest to convince them to get the services that they need. And sometimes it may just be if the home is in a deplorable situation, we may just have to reach out to the city and county officials and see if maybe they can force their hand through code enforcement and all, and just condemning the home, and that would force them out of it. We don't really want to go down that route because then they're homeless. And so now we've just made this individual that we're trying to work with even more mad at us because now they no longer have a home. So we're going to try our best to work with them the most that we can. But if we're not successful, we're not successful, and we may have to hunt it down the road until something does change. Maybe their health changes to where they're no longer decisional. Hopefully we can get some family members or somebody who are willing to at least just go keep an eye out for them to see when things change, and maybe somebody else can get involved. Another issue is just because someone's making poor decisions does not mean that they lack that capacity. We get that a lot with medical professionals, especially doctors, who are saying, well, they just didn't listen to me and you need to make them do what I say. They're not taking their medications. You need to make them take their medications. Even if we were to say that they lacked decisional capacity, a state guardian can't force medications either. There's no way to force medications on anyone unless they're in a medical setting and they're getting injections, and that's a lot more work than is capable of most. And it all requires court orders anyways. So it's not that we don't want to. Sometimes our hands are tied as well, and we have to support those adults' rights, whether it's due process or decisional or their self-determination. We just have to try to support them as best we can. And that's all I have. If there are any questions.
I wanted to remind everybody that if you have questions, you can either, if you wanted to do the raise your hand reaction, we can call on people to speak. So we're not all talking at once. Or if you want to put your question in the chat box, if you're not comfortable with speaking, then you can do so if you have any questions for Cliff or if you have any questions for any of our speakers.
Hi, Cliff.
Hello.
I have a question that I get a lot. How do you all deal with anonymous complaints? Do you take anonymous complaints?
Absolutely. Anybody can call in a report. It's not mandatory that you give your information. The only mandatory piece. Getting some echo. Okay, there we go. So the only piece of the anonymous is if we need additional information, we're just not going to be able to get it. We always tell people that if you're a referral source, your information is confidential. We're not going to give it out. I always caution you that a judge can override any decision and give your information out. And I also caution people in saying that when you give information, APS is going to have to question the victim and the perpetrator, and the way that we have to question and some of the information that you give that is very specific may end up ratting you out anyways. It's not that we're intentionally doing it. We're going to try our best, but there are some things that only specific people know. And those perpetrators know that, especially if a report is called in a day after you came out to visit them, they're going to kind of be able to piece it together, but we're never going to tell them that. Even if we're allowed to, we would never tell them because we don't want to. We always tell people the best way for you to get information is go through open records. And realistically speaking, the only two people who can get open records requests is the victim and the perpetrator. So.
Thank you, Cliff.
No problem.
Hi, Cliff. How are
Hello.
you? It's good to see you. I have a question, and it's a little specific, so I'm not exactly sure if you'll be able to answer it, but I thought, why not ask? We have an operator of a particular facility that has been proven to have exploited residents there at the facility. APS substantiated all of those claims, and there's actually a court case that has been kind of dragged out a lot because of COVID. But I understand the operator has filed an appeal, and it's just kind of sitting there, and therefore the operator's not on the abuse registry and is still able to accept residents. So I'm curious to know what that appeal process is, and if there's any timelines in which we can know and we can follow to make sure that there's some kind of decision on the APS side of things.
So, unfortunately, that appeals process is pretty lengthy sometimes. So once they get notice, they have to request an appeal within 30 days. It used to be when it first came out, we automatically afforded everyone an appeal, period. Like you didn't have to ask for it or not, we would give you an appeal. Whereas now we changed it to where you have to request it within 30 days. If it's not requested within 30 days, there's a default judgment. The problem with an appeal is for instance, for this specific one, So what's happening is she requested an appeal. They probably started the process, then a court case was filed. And then all of a sudden, our attorney is always going to put our appeal in abeyance until the criminal charges are completed. Because if the criminal charges are completed, then she no longer has an appeal and she automatically goes on the register. So that's kind of the case. And they don't want to go to an appeal and have, for some reason, have our hearing officer say, no, I don't think you all have enough facts. And then all of a sudden the criminal case goes through and she's convicted, because then we can't go back and change the appeal or change the finding from the hearing officer. So that's why it's put in abeyance, because if she's convicted criminally, that's a preponderance of it, or that's a beyond reasonable doubt, whereas we only have to have preponderance, so she wouldn't win. Unfortunately, it could last a long time. We've had cases stay in abeyance for years waiting for those. And that's one of the complaints that we've had about the registry is that if they go in abeyance or they delay things, they can delay it long enough to where even after it comes out of abeyance, it goes back to when the finding was made. So if she delayed it in criminal court for 7 years, in theory, she would never go on the register. So.
Okay, maybe not the answer I was hoping for, but thank you.
It's very frustrating. And I would say that that's something from a regulatory standpoint to try to see if the regulating agency would be willing to do anything to try to get the license suspended or something like that. That's just the frustrating. It's the due process piece. We can't violate somebody's due process. And so we just have to let it go through.
Yeah, I understand that, but very frustrating.
It is.
Thank you.
And Cliff, I had a question. So a lot of times when we see families that, they have not obtained a power of attorney for a resident and, they have become completely incompetent to make their own decisions and they have no representative, or we have, facilities contact us that, an adult is being exploited, but they're incompetent and they have no representative to help them. Can you explain the process, Adult Protective Services process in assisting with guardianship cases?
So the guardianship process changed a few years ago due to some law changes as well as some regulatory changes. So from APS's standpoint, if we get a report stating that someone needs a guardian, we're going to go out and do our own assessment and determine whether or not we believe that they lack decisional capacity. And if we do, then we're going to try to reach out to families first and find anybody that's willing to file any kind of petition for guardianship. I understand that sometimes those individuals that we reach out to may not be the most upstanding citizens and people have suspicions about them. But if we don't have any criminal history or any twist history on them, we can't stop them from filing a petition. So if they file a petition, we would just go through the process that way. If there's no family willing, then we would have to go ahead and reach out to state guardianship and make a report to guardianship. We have to refer them to guardianship, and guardianship has to agree to it as well. So they're going to do their own little and like mini investigation, I guess, to make sure that we have exhausted all least restrictive options. And it can be, sometimes it's time consuming.
So what is required of the family once they reach out to you? Because I've had a lot of families tell me, well, I looked into getting guardianship of mom, but I can't afford it. And I don't know, what the financial burden would be if you reach out to those people and they can't do it.
Sometimes the courts are willing to waive the filing fee, but that's usually why families can't do it. And that's all set by whatever county they're filing in. There are some counties that are much more willing to waive that filing fee, whereas others aren't, because that's their income, that court's income for trying to stay afloat. But if they're not willing and that's the whole reason behind it, then guardianship's not going to be very happy because there is somebody willing to do it. But it may be something that the guardianship office is willing to go ahead and file and then transition back to the family member. Or maybe it's just a matter of if there's access to the money, maybe it would be willing to let them file with the individual's money. But if they're in a nursing home, there's no extra money usually. So it is kind of sad because those filing fees can range from like just $50 all the way to $200, and then having to pay for a psychological evaluation, it adds up. And that does get daunting for families.
You're on mute, Amanda.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Cliff. Was there anybody else that had any questions? I was trying to look to see if there's anybody else with their hand up.
And if anybody has questions later on, feel free to reach out to me. You can always email me. Me and Stacy and Shelly are in the office, and we'll be glad to try to help out wherever we can.
Amanda, I think if you just share your screen, we'll be able to see your PowerPoint. If you have any troubles, let me know and I'll share.
Okay, I think I've got it. Okay. Great. Can you hear me fine?
We can.
Okay. All right. Good morning. My name is Amanda Hamilton, and I am the long-term care ombudsman in the 5 region, which is Boyd, Carter, Elliott, Greenup, and Lawrence counties in Kentucky. And we work as long-term care ombudsman, which means we are advocates for residents in long-term care facilities. And this includes nursing homes, personal care homes, and family care homes. We do not work with residents in assisted living facilities. And I just wanted to take some time to follow up with, Cliff did a great job of explaining abuse, and I wanted to just kind of go through specifically how it impacts our long-term care residents. So some statistics I just wanted to share for elder abuse and long-term care. 36% of long-term care staff members report witnessing physical abuse. 10% will admit that they have committed physical abuse, and 40% have committed psychological abuse. So this is something that is very important to educate long-term care staff and work to help remedy these issues. To go over the specific types of abuse and how it impacts long-term care residents, I want to give some examples of how the abuse may present itself in long-term care. So physical abuse, this can present as someone being hit, pushed, kicked, or slapped. This also, can be rough handling. I know, Cliff mentioned about older adults having bruises of unknown origin. We have to be very careful with older adults and how we are handling them when, we're doing changes and doing repositioning and transfers. Inappropriate lifting or pulling. It's important that staff is educated on proper lifting techniques and transitioning techniques so that they are not, inappropriately lifting on the resident or pulling on them that's going to cause some kind of injury or bruising. Inappropriate use of chemical and physical restraints, as I know that's something that has become increasingly restricted in facilities with, medications that either are a chemical restraint or can be used as a chemical restraint. And this is, if giving someone a medication that can alter their behavior to a more desirable behavior. And something that, I've noticed that facilities that have been, a lot stricter on is these, drugs that can be used, like Benadryl, using to calm somebody down, or like an antipsychotic medicine. Something really important that we've talked a lot about is the black box warning on antipsychotics, that some of these medications are very dangerous to use on, people with Alzheimer's and dementia. For emotional, verbal, and psychological abuse, this is threats, insults, humiliation, isolation. You can't, make somebody go to their room because they're misbehaving. You can't threaten them or, insult them. Social media is on here because this has become something that has become increasingly important. Staff should never be taking pictures of residents or videos and posting on social media. This is something that, can be very embarrassing for them. It violates their privacy. It violates their rights. And quite frankly, it's something that we would not want happening to us. Sexual abuse for residents can be any inappropriate sexual behavior or contact. Financial exploitation, and this is something that has become increasingly important. We see a lot during the opioid epidemic, increasing financial exploitation of residents. And this is any inappropriate use of resident funds. So if someone is in the nursing home, their money goes towards their care. People shouldn't be, using it for their personal expenses, keeping any of their money. And any of this can actually put a resident at risk of being discharged from the nursing home if they are not paying their bill and, someone's taking their money or keeping their funds. And also something that I think a lot of people don't think about is the $40 a month personal needs allowance that people in long-term care Medicaid receive. Not giving that to a resident is considered financial exploitation because that's their money and that's what they should be receiving each month. And then just taking a resident's belongings, like family members should not be taking their belongings. Anybody within the facility should not be taking their belongings from them. And neglect and abandonment is something that I think, Cliff hit on, that this is if they're not receiving proper care, they're not, they're waiting a long time for care or they're not receiving care. This can result in decreased health or bed sores. And besides just, the obvious physical issues that result like bed sores, this is if someone they've declined in their activities of daily living because they're not receiving appropriate care. Someone that used to be able to, toilet themselves if they were, gotten out of bed and taken to the bathroom is now constantly wearing a diaper because they can't depend on someone to take them to the restroom as they need to go. And also not responding to requests for care. And this is, one of the biggest things that I think we work with residents on is they don't feel like there's enough staff to meet their needs, or the staff is not coming quickly enough to respond to call lights, or they will, they don't think that they are getting the help they need or getting it quickly enough to probably provide for them. This slide, I just wanted to go over how you can report elder abuse. So of course, if there's immediate danger, you can call law enforcement. The APS hotline that Cliff mentioned is on there. The Kentucky Office of the Inspector General, that is the licensing agency for long-term care facilities. So that would be who you talk about, with specific issues about the facilities, or if you think they don't have enough staffing to provide for the residents' needs. Department of Aging and Independent Living. This is where you would contact if you're in an assisted living facility, because the same inspectors do not go to assisted living as they do in the long-term care. And of course, you can contact the long-term care ombudsman, and we will help with any problem you may have. Wayne Ann Cottle works with the Gateway area, and I work with 5Co. and our state office is on there as well if you're not in one of our regions. There's also the penalty for not reporting. This is really important to note that Kentucky does not recognize employer's chain of command. So if you're working in a nursing home and your procedure is you do not contact somebody directly, you're supposed to tell your supervisor or a DON or somebody else in the facility. That's fine, but you have to make sure that the report was made, because if you witnessed the abuse and you did not report it or make sure it was reported, you can be held liable for that not being reported. That was everything that I had, and I don't know if anybody has any questions. I can't see. Let me get out of sharing my screen. Okay. All right. If anybody has any questions, or if you have any questions for any of the other speakers.
It looks like we may have missed a question. I'm thinking maybe on Cliff's presentation, wanting to know, is this office in Moorhead? I'm not sure. Diana, if you are still on and you want to clarify, please feel free to do so. But I think Cliff, you work in the Frankfurt office, right? Main office.
That's correct. And there is an office that serves Moorhead. I don't know if. So yes, I'm in Frankfurt, and well, that we work out of the Frankfurt office right now. We're still working from home, but you can reach out, and we know we have connections to all of the offices out there. So if there is a specific question about that region, if there is a case, we can always reach out to that worker and that supervisor if needed.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Amanda. It doesn't look like we have any other questions right now. Next, we have Andrew Lakin with Legal Aid of the Bluegrass. He is our Elder Justice Fellow, and Andrew is going to tell us exactly what that means. And I'm throwing up his slide momentarily. There we go. That's Andrew's contact information and some contact information for all of us if you need to get a hold of any of us. Andrew, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Wayne Ann. So as Wayne said, I'm with Legal Aid of the Bluegrass. I'm in our Lexington office. I'm working under a grant from Equal Justice Works, focusing on elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And I cover our entire service area, even though I'm in Lexington. So I'll go ahead and put out there, a big part of this grant is doing outreach and things to try and bring light onto this issue. So wherever you are, if you're within our 33 county service area, I would be delighted to work with anyone. What I want to do is give you kind of an idea, not only of what I would do in legal aid, but also what most attorneys are going to try and do and the legal options that come into play. I normally, when it comes to things like abuse and exploitation, wait a bit, because obviously APS gets involved in a lot of these, and prefer to have them do their investigation. And then if there's something we can do, we normally come in on the back end. My focus usually is all about not only trying to make the person whole again, but also trying to provide stability, because so often, especially the clients we see at legal aid, the biggest problem is a massive instability in their life because of whatever they've been through. The first thing, as far as physical abuse, sexual abuse, it was mentioned earlier about domestic violence orders, interpersonal protective orders. We can help with anything like that. Those are normally pretty easy to get when you have proof of the abuse and something like this. The issue becomes so often, as is the issue with a lot of this, the person doesn't want to admit that something has happened to them. And that's a big reason why we're trying to put so much light on this issue, is to convey that these things do happen to people and we're here to help them as best we can. The big area I do want to go a bit more in depth on is something Amanda brought up, as far as financial exploitation. Financial exploitation is definitely something we're seeing grow. One thing I've seen a lot of during the pandemic this past year, a lot of identity theft, sometimes by family members, leading to financial exploitation of the adult. And there are a lot of options that can be taken in when that comes about. The biggest and most common issue is when there's a power of attorney involved. Power of attorneys, while amazing tools for protecting yourself and also to help when you need help, oftentimes also can double as basically a license to steal. That includes bank accounts, farms, housing, land, you name it. Once that POA is signed, oftentimes something terrible can happen. The first problem is, oftentimes the person doesn't actually know what the power of attorney is about. They don't realize how much power they're giving. That's why, even though you don't have to have an attorney do your power of attorney, I always would recommend it to anyone, no matter how much property they have. And legal aid can help those, whereas I'm limited by my grant focusing on victims of crime, be it neglect, abuse, or exploitation. We do also do simple wills and power of attorneys to try and help protect those people. When a power of attorney is used to steal property, there's quite a few steps an attorney can take to try and help the person out. The first step is, when someone is acting as a power of attorney, they're an agent with a duty to act either at the direction or in the best interest of the elder. One thing is, you are supposed to keep track of what you do with that person's property. There is an action that can be filed in probate courts where a power of attorney is involved, called an accounting, that is supposed to force the power of attorney to come forward with all the accounts, what they have done, and prove it. That on its own obviously doesn't do a lot outside of point you in the direction where the money may have gone, but it provides a foundation for the attorneys to then file civil suits to try and say, if a car was sold, get the funds that were used. We wouldn't be able to get the car back, but we can probably get a judgment for the money because they've breached their fiduciary duty as your power of attorney in those cases. Obviously, the bigger concern oftentimes isn't money, it's the stability that is gone, and not just because of the money. Oftentimes obviously, if you have, say, a transfer, the power of attorney transfers the home into their own name or something with no money, that's going to have ramifications on benefits and anything else. So it's important to try and get a hold of an attorney who can try and help with that, get the transfers undone, and see what can be done to try and get the benefits, whether it be medical benefits, housing benefits, something like that. So that is going to be what most attorneys are able to do. Another thing that we are seeing in legal aid that I will discuss briefly is the frankly terrifying rise we've seen of scams. Like I said, I've seen a lot of identity theft. I've had people call and say that someone hijacked their computer and drained their bank account because of a program that got on while the person had their online banking open and things like that. The sad thing is a lot of those cases we can't do anything about because oftentimes we don't know who the person on the other end of that scam is. If it's something local in the state, we can report to the Attorney General's office, who will try and take some action. And we have lawsuits as well in that case. The problem becomes with internet scams, phone scams, anything with gift cards involved and the like, it's next to impossible to really do anything about. We still would urge, if anything like that happens, for them to contact us. We can at least help guide them down the steps to report it to the FBI is normally who you would go to if it's something like an internet scam. Legal aid can help do that. If it's identity theft, we can help navigate the Federal Trade Commission, who is the government agency that's most involved in that. But the biggest thing with those is, once again, getting out in the community and educating people so they don't fall victim to those scams, because once you do, it's very, very hard to recover from. And that's the sad truth that has started to rear its head as we've become more reliant on the internet in the past year, especially for seniors. And just a little clarification on what I do as a closeout. Like I said, most attorneys will do things like this. My specific role in legal aid is if a person's been a victim of, has to have been a victim of a crime, such as neglect, exploitation, abuse. But we are attempting to try and help as many as we can if there's been identity theft, abuse, if a contract has been coerced out of them by trying to take advantage of their age, their inability to take care of themselves or something like that. We're willing to step in on things like that. Many consumer issues we are willing to help with. And as I said, we have our Title III funding at Legal Aid as well that will help with most senior issues and actually covers more counties than I do. So if there is any issue that legal aid might be able to help with, not just abuse, then it would be great to just go ahead, forward our information, our intake information, and we'll see what we can do. Any client is going to have to go through our intake first before they get to me, though. So they'll need to call our general intake line, and then I'd be more than happy to see what I can do to help anyone. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
All right. I am trying to get to the point where I can see the questions, and I cannot. Do we have any questions, Angela?
I don't see any, Wayne Ann. Thank you.
Okay.
This
All
is
right.
Kathleen. I've got one question. How does the mandatory reporting work with attorneys? Like if an attorney sees a client being abused by a power of attorney or something?
That normally, we do make it clear that we may have to report if, as we look into it, we believe it's reasonable. All the ones I've had come in like that, APS has already been involved in. But normally if you believe there is, then you would need to obviously do your due diligence to try and see what you think there is as far as abuse. And if you believe there is, I believe you do have to report it, because we're not named in the statute, but we are not specifically left out of the statute. I will say one thing as far as attorneys only, there is an attorney general's opinion from the 1980s, I believe, that does specifically say if it is a domestic violence situation, we need the client's permission. So I think that is what it comes down to, is do you feel it is an as far as that goes. But domestic violence, we do specifically need client permission ethically under the Attorney General's opinion.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions? All right, and I did find the chat box. Once I started sharing my screen, it all moved on me. Doesn't look like we have anything else in chat. All right, thank you, Andrew. And once again, if you just have a question for Andrew or for anyone, you can email us at ltcombudsman@legalaid.org. We can forward your question to anyone at any time. So I want to wrap up today by talking about local coordinating councils on elder maltreatment. That's a mouthful. We just call them elder abuse councils. Okay. So I want to talk about, what are they? What can they do? What do they do? You know, we're coming out of a time right now when councils like this and programs have been struggling to find ways to stay active. So I think we're all getting a lot of meeting requests right now. Groups are starting to meet up. I know I've got two groups meeting this week. And so it's a time to kind of evaluate and reevaluate, what are these groups that we're members of? How can we make them stronger? It's a perfect time to look at things like that. And one of those groups is your LCCEM, your Elder Abuse Council. So in the late 90s, Kentucky created what's called the Elder Abuse Committee or Elder Abuse Council. It's a state council. As a part of that, they created local councils to coordinate with that state council. That's why they're called local coordinating councils. They coordinate with the state council. Many of the local councils are organized around your area development districts, kind of like our ombudsman program are. I think you have a few local councils in localities. Cliff is our LCCEM guru, but I just want to put this information out there, because I know here in the Gateway area, we're getting ready to start meeting again, and we're getting ready to send out a lot of invitations to our council. So like I said, we're more commonly known as the Elder Abuse Council. What are our goals? The goal of the councils are to develop community-wide prevention and intervention systems. You know, it's a multidisciplinary team. We have things actually called multidisciplinary teams. This is something different. This is made up of all kinds of different people. We'll get that into a second, but we want to identify and coordinate roles and services of local agencies, because everybody does a little something different, but at the same time, our services might overlap too. You know, Andrew with legal aid and your local APS worker, they're both working in different ways to help protect our elders from abuse and neglect. So how do their roles and how do these resources work together? What can we do for people? And it's important for all these different agencies to know what all the other different agencies do. If someone at APS, you know, they know that this victim needs a domestic violence order, and they know, okay, they're going to send them to the county attorney to get that started. Well, what if the victim also wants their own attorney, but APS doesn't realize that legal aid provides attorneys for that? If we're all on the same page when it comes to being on things like the council together, we know what our services are. We know what services are available for victims out there. And one of the big things, besides being a clearinghouse of information for the agencies themselves, the councils are clearinghouses of information for the community. The job of the council is to promote the resources, to tell people, make sure everybody knows how to recognize and report elder abuse. You know, to make sure everyone knows that APS is out there and what they do, that legal aid is out there and what they do. That things like your Aging and Disability Resource Center is there, and what services do they provide, and how can they help? Your SHIP services, when you have people, you know, people need, you know, health care, things like that. So all these services need someone to promote them. Who can serve on the councils? Really anyone. Law enforcement, long-term care staff, judges, ombudsmen, bankers, care providers, aging services providers, your local mental health providers and case managers, in-home care providers, probation and parole officers. And if that's not enough, you know, there's a general catch-all. Any kind of elder community stakeholder. At one time in the Ashland area, we had a couple of ministers on the Elder Abuse Council, local faith leaders. So any place, and one of the interesting things I learned through this work, we've got bankers on there. And at first I thought that was I'm like, okay, bankers and elder abuse. Well, who's on the front lines a lot of times of recognizing financial exploitation of elders? It's a bank teller. So, you know, lots of people have a stake in recognizing and reporting and helping protect our elders from elder abuse. And so if you or someone you know might be interested in serving on a local council, once again, let us know. And we can, if you're not in the Gateway or the Five Co area, we can put you in contact with your area council. That's a easy thing to do. Our ombudsmen are always involved in that in their home areas. Do we have any questions right now about LCCEMs? Okay. Do you have any questions about the presentation at all that have not been asked? Something occurred to someone? Anyone? Okay. I want to thank Cliff and Andrew and Amanda for presenting today. And thank you all for the work that you do. We are going to, I believe, this is being recorded, and I think we're going to throw it up on our YouTube page when we get it ready. And you can view it there if you missed part of it, or if you want to catch some of that information again. We're under the Legal Aid of the Bluegrass Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program on YouTube. And at this time, I'll say thank you for joining us today. Once again, any further questions, feel free to email us at ltcombudsman@lablaw.org. And have a great rest of your week, everyone. Thank you so much.